Hello, welcome back. It's me again, Robin, the single solitary Inwit that is currently doing these shows. Eventually, Jack will be back. I'm positive of it. But for now, I'm just still going to keep breaking down Survivor, not Survivor. Survivor. These last 3 episodes of Australian Survivor were very infuriating to me. So I'm going to break them down, and then I'm going to probably go into how the last final 5 can win. Because next week I think is our grand finale, the 3 episodes left. So how they could win, should win, or won't win, in my view. But just before I touch onto that, for those who also watch South African Survivor, man, Anala did one of the craziest things ever by going to make a move and then realizing it wasn't his move. If you're watching it, great Survivor. This South African Survivor season is brilliant. But Anala did this crazy, one of the characters, he has decided to flip on his alliance. And then when he flipped on the alliance, all of a sudden the plan that he wanted became too complicated or not his plan. And then he backflipped on his own flip and went and told the people he flipped on that he flipped. Crazy Survivor suicide, that was. It was mental to see such a ridiculous move happen. But if you aren't watching Survivor South Africa, please do. It's awesome, not just for the accents, but some really great gameplay. Now, moving on to Australian Survivor, which gameplay has been very frustrating to me. So we had our final 7, sorry. So starting this week, we had our King George and Queen Hayley with their subordinates Cara and Way. And then on the other side, we've got Danny, Flick, and Andrew. Andrew, who goes home on Monday night. Oh no, sorry, Sunday night, our first episode. I mean, I don't understand where his strategy was or what he was even thinking. I've actually just read that he never even watched an episode of Survivor. That blows my mind. Like, you're going to try and win $500,000. Like, if you're not there for the money, sure, great, good, the experience. But if most people have money, are going on this show, most people are going on the show to win the money, or hopefully win the money. And he didn't watch a single episode. So that explains a lot of his strategy going into the whole season and why he was so emotional, why he was so upset when Hayley ratted them out. And then why he became really upset and solely focused on destroying George. Never seen the show, doesn't understand the show. His final vote for Flick as this ridiculous Hail Mary play that makes no sense, to try and vote out the one of his alliance members in a hope that it's not him, just shows how much he had no clue. As far as a survival expert goes, I mean, George, in his little vote reveal confessional, summed it up pretty well, where he said, you might be a survival expert, but Survivor is my playground, or whatever. The quote he said was very, very good, because Andrew had no clue how Survivor is played. And even as far as a survival expert goes, I don't think his survival strengths of snake handling, spiders, what you can and can't eat, and I saw a video of him how to eat a cane toad. That doesn't come in handy. I really don't believe he's a super expert at fire making. Maybe he is, but beside the point. He's out. It was frustrating. But within that episode, we had a couple of interesting things. We had the reward challenge where Cara drew the red rock and she doesn't participate, and she gets to bet on which team is going to win, and she can go on the reward with them. Cara and George are really powerful too. Well, George is a really powerful too with Cara. Cara does this really awesome thing that I don't know if it was intentional or not. She picks, out of who's going to win this challenge, she picks the team that isn't George's team. Maybe mostly because they were going to win, she thought. But on top of that, the fact that she can now, if they do win, she splits George and her up, which is pivotal. In this part of the game, these reward challenges are a moment of isolation, where away from other people, a moment to wheel and deal. And that doesn't mean wheel and deal just because you won the reward. You can wheel and deal back at camp if you don't win the reward. So Cara bets against George, meaning they have 2 ears in both little pockets, and we do get Danny's Danny's thing and try to vote out or try and make a push for George. And obviously it's not going to work because George and Cara are super tight, and Danny's overly blunt and not strategic behind her strategy plays. She has a plan, and her plans make sense, but they are very poorly executed. Anyway, we get the tribal, and we get this really we get the reveal of the next non-elimination night, which will be in the shape of Russian roulette. 4 different urns. 1 urn has the potential to save you. Great. Andrew goes home in a safe vote. Bit of a curveball having the urns revealed there. Andrew doesn't get, he doesn't pick the right urn, and he's now safe. Anyway, we're now left with our final 6 going into our final 5. So Andrew goes home, and then we are left with three sets of 2. We've got Cara and George, we've got Hayley and Wei, and we've got Danny and Flick. Now this is where I get super frustrated with this game. Danny and Flick, original Brawns, 4, and the other 4 are original Brain Tribe. Irrelevant. It's really irrelevant. What you have here is 3 sets of 2. Now, George is very manipulative and doing a very great job. In the last episode, he's told Wei, who is having a hard time about wanting to vote Andrew out, that Andrew wants to get Wei out. Wei believes him. Wei doesn't double cross-check that information and talk to Andrew. She just blindly believes him. Andrew goes home, leaves us in this situation with 2, 2, and 2. It might look like a 4-2 split, but that makes no sense. You have the 2 Brawn on the bottom, which are an amazing. It's the Brawn on the bottom are opportunity now, and it's who's going to use this opportunity. The Brawn are so hell-bent on, everyone's hell-bent on getting George out. It becomes their downfall. George is now preaching unity and trust. And that might be a really great gameplay for him because he's in control and he has the resume. And as long as people follow the plan, it all looks like his work. And then we have Hayley, who the first half of this season, Hayley was an absolute dynamo. Look, I really, really like Hayley. I think she's a great player. However, the fact that she was voted out unanimously across the board has really shaken her up, I feel. She's now started to play it very, very safe, and rightly so. When she came back into the game, she had to really decrease her threat. She had to wheel and deal and stay in the game as much as she can and just stay in the numbers. She did that. Now it's time to make moves. And this episode I find really interesting because we still have the urns in play. We have Cara has now found an idol, which means George and Cara have a secret idol for their 2. Amazing for them going ahead. Pretty much can guarantee them final 5, final 4 very easily, having this idol in the back pocket. But that urn that someone could be saved is really, it's the game. It's I think I mentioned it in this a couple of episodes ago, where what I really liked about Hayley was when there's this twist that takes the game out of your control, you really need to play within that realm. So Danny is sitting there starting to say and tell Hayley and Wei that this is the time to make a big move. You need to make a big move. But a big move, when the fact that you can blindside someone and they can come straight back in, really screws up your chances. So I really like how Hayley and Wei don't make a big move here. Instead, this is the chance that they put their faith and gameplay in the elements of this game being these urns. And they vote Flick out, and Flick gets saved. Perfect. This couldn't work any better, but it does. It works so much better that Cara is spooked and she plays her idol. for no votes on Cara. They were all on George. I don't know why Cara thinks people are coming for her, because she isn't doing anything. She's not doing anything to win the game. You're taking George. George gets to the end. He's a strong case to win the game. But you can't vote George out when there's a chance that George is going to come back in, because you know George. You've played with George for 40 odd days. He's going to get you back. He's not going to stick to that alliance. He's going to do some great strategic play. He's very conniving. He's this season's mastermind, but he's left himself open in the next episode, which frustrates me as well. But Flick gets saved, and we're still left with our final two. Going into last night's episode, Monday night's episode, I do get a lot of Wei saying how she wants to control the game, she wants to make a big move, she wants a resume, or in Sunday night, and her resume is to listen to George. Not a resume at all. And then you get Monday night, you get Danny making the biggest mistake that most people make, going, I've got the immunity necklace because she wins immunity. I have all the power. You don't have any power. The immunity necklace, the only power that gives you is the fact that you are not going home. It's a false sense of security that people just feel they've got power. George is the only one with power in this game. Unfortunately, he's the only one with power. And we see this now in this episode that went past. We're back to our 2-2-2 split. Hayley does mention it, that she's in the middle and she has the power. Going forward, all Hayley needs to do is take Hayley and take Wei. Hayley and Wei at the end, Hayley wins hands down. She's somehow fallen in line with being with the GOAT of the season as her power couple, as her second in charge. And Wei even says, I'm gonna put my trust in what Hayley wants to do. She has nothing. Wei cannot win this game going forward. She can't. And what we have end up happening is Wei wins immunity, great. Flick and Danny find the hidden immunity idol, don't tell anyone about it. Is this a good play? Again, I'm an advocate for never telling anyone about an idol, but when you can only use the idol either tonight or this tribal or next tribal, maybe it's time to use it. Maybe it's time to use it as a power play to get the vote on your side. Regardless, she gets to final four because she has an idol. Anyway, we're left with this situation where Hayley and Wei are in the middle and they get to choose who's going to go home, whether it be George or whether it be Danny. And Hayley says, this is exactly where I want to be. And I get excited because you are exactly where you need to be. And she also says, this is a decision that will give me the $500,000 or not. And she chose the wrong decision, in my eyes. Just not voting out George is a sign of her fear of how the jury see her as a flipper, as how the jury have responded to her since she's been voted out. This is a move based on fear. What needed to be done here for Hayley to have any chance of winning, which upsets me because I really want Hayley to win, and she could still win, but in my eyes, Hayley needed to stick with Danny and Flick, vote out George, jump ship, go to Cara, take Cara as a 3, vote out Danny or Flick. So what you now do is you are separating two couples. Yes, of course, they've still technically done that. Danny was voted out, and now our final 5, Flick on her own with an idol, Hayley, Wei, George, Cara. By keeping George, Hayley has screwed herself over because that looks like George is completely in control. And the jury can't do anything but see how George is controlling everything. And Hayley doesn't get an opportunity to shine. Blindsiding George gives her that opportunity, gives her that moment to take the game back into her hands. Now she just becomes a passenger in the most powerful position. Blows my mind that she let that happen and Danny goes home. And that leaves us now to our final 5 and what they can do going forward. You only really, So right now, Cara and Wei, I don't think have much hope of winning unless the only two left are Cara and Wei. Wei hasn't done anything. I mean, this week we saw Wei just not even attempt to do a challenge. Not that she's comfortable, she just didn't want to do a challenge. Then she wins a challenge, good on her. You won an individual immunity. The game isn't built on individual immunities. The game's built on strategy. You have none. You haven't outwitted anyone. You are only outlasting because you're not a threat. So you can't outplay anyone. Outwit, outlast, outplay, you haven't done anything. So Wei can't win. Cara can't win. Cara has been, she might think she's her own person, and she might say that it's we get to discuss what decisions happen. But at the end of the day, George knows Survivor. He knows the game really, really well. And even though he made a little bit of a blue here by putting his game into trust, he's got the strongest resume. No one comes anywhere close, because George has been playing since day one. He's made mistakes on day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But then he honed in his skill, then his strategy started working, then the game worked in his favor. And he's strong. He's in a really good position. Should have gone home. George should not be there right now. It blows my mind that you've left someone who is that much of a strategic beast to still be in the game. On the offside that someone's a bit of an all-rounder. I don't know. We're missing a lot of stuff. I'm not seeing what I see on TV is Danny. To vote Danny out was incorrect because she's an all-rounder, but her strategy has the right idea. It's just not executed at all correctly, and she hasn't executed ever correctly. So for me, Cara and Wei, they can't win unless they're versing each other. And then it's, maybe you give it to Wei because she should have been gone on the very first vote. Flick can win. Flick can win on the basis of her mum died while she was out there. Her mum died 5-6 days ago or 10 days ago, and she's out there competing. The emotional aspect of her story is a big one, and we've seen stories of, and not that you should or shouldn't, but personal stories can help you win the game. We had, man, I wish I was good at remembering everybody's names. For those of you who are expert Survivor people and remember every single thing about it, who was the guy that won Survivor and talked about his mum being in cancer, his mum having cancer, and then when between Survivor ending and the announcement of the winner, this is US Survivor, his mum passed away. That was a win. And I think Jeremy said something about his kids or family or something near at the final tribal to get him across the line and win and beat Dominic. So Flick's got a great story to win the game. She's been competitive. She's well liked. Strategy, she doesn't really have much, but she doesn't need it to win. Going forward, she plays the idol next tribal, guarantees her space. She should have probably told people about the idol so Danny would still be there with her. But she guarantees a spot in Final Four. That gives her a chance. She's pretty physical. She could win some individual immunities, go home and get to the final tribal, the final 2, final 3, whatever comes up. I'm assuming it's the final 2, but you never know. When we switch to final 3, we might switch to final 3 any given time. So she can win. Hayley should be the winner. How can she win from here? Voting out George was a golden opportunity to start to add that resume, start to strengthen that resume again. She started off strong. People understand she's strategic. People understand she's really smart, and she's been laying low. She missed a golden opportunity to strike, because now if her and Wade decide to flip, to go with Flick, which is they still have the numbers 3 versus 2. It's still fine to flip now, and you need to. For Hayley and Wade, they need to split both sides up. The problem is, Flick's idol comes into play, Whether she does it or does, like, it's just too. I feel like she's left her run a little bit too late. George. I mean, George is the outright winner for me right now because of how he's played. However, he said in this last episode that I have to leave sometimes you can't be in control when you're playing Survivor. And I understand that comment, but I really don't think that's 100% correct, because you can still be in control when you're not in control. This is something I think Cara said to him, like, let Way decide, let Way have a chance to talk. George doesn't allow that. If George allowed other people to have their say, to make other people feel like they're worthy, George then has a chance to really be a complete player, a complete strategist. What I would have loved to see from George is George not sit there and go, I've got to put my trust in Hayley and Way, but turn on Hayley and Way, put himself in the middle position. It might have been really tricky. That would have been a really hard game to play, because, I mean, Danny would have probably told Hayley. But ideally, I would have loved to take the target off himself. Like Hayley said, I have two people over here who are gunning for those two people. Those two people are gunning for those two people. I can sit here happily. No one's looking at me. George, people are looking at George, and rightly so, they should be looking at George. But George's strongest move, I mean, it doesn't matter because no one comes close to him as far as a resume goes. But I would have loved to have seen George make that flip and put Hayley and Way in the center. Way can go all the way to the end because no one sees her as a threat. And she can pull off a Christy Bennett from season 1 of Australian Survivor by not being seen as a threat and take out the win. We're all, and then start to play with the whole concept of, Danny, you're hugely strategic. I'm hugely strategic. Hayley's hugely strategic. We're all threats. We need to band together to get rid of these people who are going to swoop in and take the game from us. Way shouldn't be here. She doesn't deserve to be here. And by him turning the tides and putting himself in that central place where he can now dictate exactly what happens by allowing other people to have a chance of making a move. That would have been a top-notch play in my mind. But he doesn't need to. George has done the groundwork. He's built the foundation that, you know what, now, if he has, that said, he has to win immunity because he should be 100% next to go home. There is no way George gets to the end unless he wins immunity. Cara blowing that idol really screwed him over. Because now they didn't have it and looked like they were looking, everyone seemed to be looking for it. But strange that George didn't find it. Strange that George, especially when they had time away from camp, the other three had time away from camp, that he wasn't looking for the idol there, or he couldn't find it there. Because that idol was crucial for George getting through. Being such a threat, George needs to win immunity next time, which is already looking pretty tricky for him. Way is much better at the puzzles. If it comes to a puzzle, as we saw, she was last in the whole challenge, but because she was able to do the puzzle first, she wins. Which is nice to finally have the brains element be a reason to win a puzzle rather than Brawn's, which, I mean, I have read a little bit about that. Like when a season's called Brains versus Brawn's, you should really have a lot, like a 50-50 split on challenges. I mean, and this was a puzzle challenge at the end, but to get to the end, Way, who probably weighs as much as a paperweight, had to pick up a sledgehammer and smash through four 2x4 bits of wood. I mean, it's ridiculous. But it's nice to see that she was still able to win with the puzzle. So George loses most likely to Way on a puzzle, and he doesn't compete physically to a Hayley or a Flick. There is no way Hayley and Way should vote with George again. George's only hope is if they're afraid he has an idol, and they would be afraid if Flick doesn't mention anything, they'd be afraid he has an idol, and they try and get rid of Cara. But I just don't see that happening. But yeah, so I would assume George is the next to go, purely on his threat and where he's put himself. He's let this little moment where he said, I need to put my trust. Sometimes you can't be in control. You're not allowed to be in control. Sometimes you're not allowed to be in control. You got to let the survivor gods, or whatever god, I can't remember what god he keeps talking about, Macedonian Jesus, look after him. That has really screwed him over because he's now out of control. He has no control. He has to hope Hayley and Way don't jump across. Unless he can jump across first. He's got to pull in Flick before Hayley and Way pull in Flick. However, Flick won't go. Flick might go because she's put too much trust in Hayley, and Hayley's burnt her away before. So what George needs to do is George needs to really plea for Flick to come across and vote Hayley out, which is possible. That's not out of the realms of what George would do, but he should have done that with Danny and Flick personally, because then he's got a bit more time and to maneuver. Cara can't win. Hayley needs to jump across. Hayley needs to pull in Flick. Flick just needs to go to whoever wants to. Flick can sit back now. Flick has now put herself in the powerful position. She hasn't put herself. Flick has fallen into the most powerful position. There is no way she goes home. She doesn't actually need to play her idol, because she shouldn't be voted out. It'd make no sense if anyone wants to vote Flick out. George can preach it, but George really needs to vote out a Way, or more importantly, vote out a Hayley. He's queen. Flick doesn't need to do anything. Flick is safe. Flick's through to the final four. And then she just needs to win and go on. And maybe take out the money. It's only between George and Hayley, and both of them made mistakes in this episode that's going to cost them the ability to control that final vote. Hayley really should have jumped ship. Hayley needs to hope Flick will give her one final chance, because George is such a threat. But how does the jury see her? I see her second half of the game as really weak, unfortunately. But yeah, so that's what I think they should be doing going forward. Way and Cara don't really have a chance of winning unless it's them. The way Way and Cara can win is Way and Cara have to split from Hayley and George, go to Flick, and then start take out George, then Hayley, and then hope that they beat Flick in the final puzzle and the final challenge. That's the only way they can win. Hayley and Way and Cara need to split from there two and join another two, or form another two, which will not happen. They don't think like that. There is no chance they can win. Anyway, that might be it. I don't know where I've gone on that. I tried to include what would happen next, but I think that was just a mess, an absolute mess of communication. Anyway, see you next week.